topic that I'm going to address is social ontology, the nature of society. And the way that the discussion fits into the Congress is in, well, there are a number of ways it fits in. First of all, let me situate today's discussion in recent intellectual history. A couple of decades ago, a guy at Harvard, Ed Wilson, challenged social scientists to use sociobiology as the foundation of their discipline. And Wilson had numerous followers and it received a great deal of attention, the sociobiological movement. The basic idea was that we should think of human society as really an extension of animal societies, forms of non-human animal social existence. And there has to be something right about that because we think of ourselves as continuous with the rest of the animal kingdom. But unfortunately, Wilson's challenge was met with outrage rather than discussion. There's an interesting question that Wilson was posing that was not adequately answered, and I'm going to address it today. And that is, how does human society differ from other animal societies? See, Wilson said if you want to understand apartment houses in Beijing, you ought to study anthills. But notice nobody ever says, if you want to study anthills, you ought to begin with apartment houses in Beijing. And I think there are important differences, and I'm going to be talking about some of them. Now, you'll misunderstand what I'm going to talk about if you think that it is entirely preliminary, that I'll be address this as a issue. There's a much larger philosophical and intellectual question, and that is, what is the ontology, what is the mode of existence of human societies that makes it different from other animal societies? And I'm going to be arguing that language is in a very special way constitutive of human society, and this is what makes it different from other animal societies. It's not just in any other way that language relates to human society, but rather language as a biological phenomenon is essentially social in a way that renders society essentially linguistic. And I need to explain that. It is, let me put it this way, it's something of a scandal that our theorists of sociology and political philosophy have a common feature that seems to me a weakness in our intellectual tradition. They all take language for granted. They all assume that we are language-speaking animals, and then they're often running with various accounts of the social contract and collective communicative action, and discursive formations, and all the rest of it. Whereas what I'm going to be arguing is you can't assume that you begin with a state of nature where people are speaking a language and then they form a society, because on the account that I'm going to be giving you, once you've got a language, you've already got a social contract. Once you have a language in the crucial sense that I'm going to try to explain, you already have a social contract. Okay, now, what I'm going to be discussing then is how do we get from ourselves as mere social animals, as animals capable of cooperating with other animals, how do we get from there to having the unique features of human social ontology? And I'm thinking of money, property, government, marriage, universities, international conferences, cocktail parties, summer vacations, income tax, and all of those features that make our lives so pleasant, enjoyable, miserable, and otherwise anxiety-making. So we're going to be talking about, as it were, the building blocks of human social reality. Now, there's one distinction I need to make at the very beginning, which seems to be essential for understanding the foundations of the social sciences. And that is, we need to distinguish between those features of the world that exist independently of us, those that have what I would call an observer-independent existence, such as mountains, molecules, and tectonic plates. If we all died tomorrow, if no human had ever existed, hydrogen atoms would still have one electron, even if there was no one around to say that, because that is observer-independent. But in addition to that, there is a mode of reality that's interesting to us that is observer relative. It only is what it is because we think that's what it is. It's only money because we think it's money. He's only president because we think he's president. This is a university because we think and treat and regard it and speak of it as a university, and so on. All of these phenomena are observer relative. And one way to put the topic of what we're discussing is how do we overcome the apparent paradox between saying that there is a reality that is what it is only because we think that's what it is, and yet it is objective. It's an epistemically objective fact that these colored bits of paper I carry around in my wallet are actually money. American tourists abroad are always flabbergasted to discover that people will really accept this as money, but they do. When I go into the store and I give them a 100-yuan note, they don't say, well, maybe you think it's money, but why should we care what you think? They accept it as money. So one way to put the paradox is, how can there be a reality which is objective? It's not a matter of my opinion that it's money, and yet it only is what it is because we think that's what it is, because we accept it as what it is. Okay, now what I'm going to argue is you need three building blocks to get institutional reality, to get human institutional facts like money, property, government, marriage, and the other ones that I mentioned. First of all, you need a capacity for cooperation. You need collective intentionality, because the form of social reality that I will be talking about requires collective acceptance. As I said before, Bush is only president because we accept that he's president. The pieces of paper are only money because we accept that they are money. So collective intentionality is the first building block on the road to human institutional facts. The second building block is a peculiar capacity that humans, along with lots of other animals, but none so much as humans have, for assigning functions to objects, where a function is always observer relative. This is a bottle because we use it as a bottle. We can use it as a paperweight, an object to throw, but we assign a function to this object. So the second thing we need is the assignment of function. Other animals have the capacity to assign functions, but nothing like humans with their famous tool use capacities. What we're going to see, however, is that humans have a capacity to do something that very few other animals have, and that is to assign functions to objects, where the functions are performed not in virtue of the physical structure of the object, but rather in virtue of the fact that there is a collective acceptance or recognition of the object as having a certain status, and in virtue of that status, a function that can only be performed in virtue of that collective recognition. I'm sorry that's a long sentence, but you're going to hear it in different versions as we progress. What I'm thinking of the fact, for example, that George Bush is president of the United States, that the piece of paper is money, that this is a university. Now, certain physical features are necessary conditions for something to function as a president or as a university, but they're not sufficient. You have to have a collective acceptance of a certain status. So and a status then enables the function to be performed only in virtue of that collective acceptance. And what we're going to be discussing in the next few minutes are what is the logical structure of that collective acceptance. Okay, so I've got two building blocks so far. One is the collective intentionality, the capacity for cooperation. And the second is the assignment of function. And just a hint ahead, we're going to be looking at a certain class of functions which require the collective acceptance. They're built on collective intentionality. Okay. Now the third building block is the one that's going to take me a few minutes to explain, and that is there's a certain linguistic maneuver that humans have evolved which is, so to speak, I don't want to use pretentious scientific metaphors, but it's, so to speak, the DNA, or if you like, it's the chemical bond of human society. And it will take me a few minutes to explain it. But in order to do that, I have to show how language is composed and developed from pre-linguistic resources. If you think of a pre-linguistic animal, and we're talking now partly speculatively, but partly historically, because of course there were once beasts that looked a lot like us, roaming around the earth, hominids. They didn't have a language, and then later on they got a language. What happened in between? They got a whole bunch of languages that we know all too well. What happened in between? How do you go from pre-linguistic intentionality to linguistic intentionality? Now, when I put the question in that way, it'll sound like I'm going to do speculative evolutionary biology, but that's not it. I don't know how it, in fact, developed, and we may never know because there's no fossil evidence, or very little fossil evidence. But we know that we started without language, but with pre-linguistic forms of cognition, and then we got language. What are the conceptual resources we had that could have enabled language to evolve, and what did we evolve when we evolved language? So, to repeat, I'm not doing speculative neurobiology, I'm doing philosophical analogies. Subtract languages from beasts like us, what have you got? Now add language, what are you adding? Okay, the first thing to notice is there's a remarkable similarity of structure between the structure of the speech act and the structure of the intentional state. By the way, for those of you who are not philosophers, intentionality is a fancy philosopher's term for the directedness or aboutness of mental states. So beliefs and desires and hopes and fears are all intentional in this sense, but pains and sort of forms of anxiety are not intentional. Okay, the first thing you notice is that the structure of the speech act, where you have a propositional content presented with a certain force, the difference between, for example, will you leave the room, you will leave the room, please leave the room, same proposition, different speech acts, different elocutionary forces, that has an exact analog in the structure of the mind, where you have a state with a propositional content. And just as I can predict that you will leave the room, or order you to leave the room, so I can hope you will leave the room, fear that you will leave the room, wish that you leave the room, and so on. Now, furthermore, there's an interesting further similarity between the formal structure of the mind and the formal structure of the speech act, and that is speech acts relate to reality in different ways. The aim of a statement is to be true or false, and I say for that reason that the words are supposed to fit an independently existing world. They have the word-to-world direction of fit, whereas orders and commands are not supposed to fit an independently existing world. Orders, commands, and promises and threats are supposed to change the world, so the world comes to match the speech act. That is to say, they have the upward or word-to-word direction of fit. The simplest test, by the way, for whether or not something has this direction of fit is, can you literally say that it's true or false? Utterances like statements, descriptions, classification, and explanations have this direction of fit because they're true or false. Orders, commands, and promises are not true or false. They have this direction of fit. Now that carries over exactly to the mind. Beliefs, like statements, have what we might call the mind-to-world direction of fit. They can be true or false. Desires and intentions cannot be true or false. They have what we might call the world-to-mind direction of fit. Now, I'm going through this stuff rapidly because I want to use the tools to show how you develop human society out of this. But now there's a third connection between language and the mind, which is crucial. And that is, because you have propositional contents, and because they fit or fail to fit the world, we can introduce the notion of the speech act as being satisfied or not, as being satisfied or unsatisfied. So what stands to the statements being true is what stands to the orders being obeyed, is what stands to the promise being kept. In each case, the fit is satisfied, and that distinction carries over to the mind. What stands to the beliefs being true is what stands to the desire being fulfilled, is what stands to the intention being carried out. So far, it looks like when you get language, you just get a sort of externalization of what's already going on in the mind. The statement is an expression of belief, the command is an expression of desire, the promise is an expression of an intention. But now there's a peculiar, mysterious feature to language which is going to be crucial to the argument I'm going to present, and that is there are a class of utterances that don't just fit an independently existing reality. Rather, they change reality by representing reality as having been changed. They make something the case by representing it as being the case. They have both directions of fit at once. And notice, they're not two running parallel, but they're the same speech act that both makes something the case and it represents it as being the case, and it makes it the case by representing it as being the case. Now, the most famous of these are called performative. Austin discovered a performative utterance where you make something the case by saying that it's the case. You make it the case that the meeting is adjourned by saying the meeting is adjourned. You make it the case that war is on by saying war is declared. That somebody is a married couple by saying, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Now, I'm going to argue later on that it's that maneuver, that ability to create a reality by representing that reality as already existing, which is the key to understanding human social ontology. And I want to put it in as strong and naked a set of terms I can, because I hope to provoke discussion. I don't want to provoke objections. It's always good to state the thesis in a strong form, because then it's easier to prove that it's false. Okay, now what's interesting, of course, is the performative is a special case. You see, the performative requires that there are already performative verbs. But I want to say we do this all the time. We make something the case by representing it as being the case. I walk back from the bar carrying the beers. I put one in front of Sally, and I say, that one's yours. And I put one in front of Betty, and I say, that one's yours. I did not describe a pre-existing reality. I created a reality by representing it. Or, one of my favorite examples, there's a mysterious statement on all American currency. It says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And, of course, I'm an epistemologist. I wonder, how do they know? Have they actually done a survey, an investigation to discover that these bits of paper are legal tender? But, of course, they are making it the case by declaring it to be the case. And I have a name for this type of speech act that has the double direction of it. I call them declarations. As I said, I'm going to argue that the declaration is the primary building block. It's the one that distinguishes human social reality from other forms of social reality. We're not there yet, so let's see how we can build up to that argument. Imagine that we have these creatures with this type of mental state, but they don't yet have speech acts. Now, there's a huge difference between this structure and this structure, because this is an act. This represents an act. And this over here is a speech act, whereas this represents a mental state. Now, how do you get from the mental state to the speech act? And there is a wonderful device by which we do that. It's called meaning. And what is meaning? How do we create meaning? Now, since my aim here is not the philosophy of language, but the philosophy of society, I'm just going to state this somewhat dogmatically in hopes that somebody wants to challenge me, they can. And that's this. The secret of understanding speaker meaning, how we make these noises to our mouth, and they are meaningful, is that we intentionally impose conditions of satisfaction on conditions conditions of satisfaction. We make a gesture, or a noise, or an utterance, and that's the condition of satisfaction with the intention to make it. But then, what makes it meaningful is we intentionally impose on that utterance truth conditions, or obedience conditions, or fulfillment conditions, conditions of satisfaction of various kinds. Now, that's the key device that gets us from these mental states to these speech acts, is we imagine that the creatures in question are able to do that intentionally for the purpose of imposing conditions of satisfaction on conditions of satisfaction. Now, unfortunately, I've got an awful lot I want to cover, and I don't know how much time I'm allowing myself. Am I doing all right for time? Okay. All right, so let me go over that a little bit more slowly. The easiest way to see that point is to imagine it for already existing languages. I like to practice French, improve my French pronunciation. Suppose I'm standing in the shower and I just practice uttering a French sentence for the purpose of pronouncing it correctly. I say over and over, il peut, il peut, il peut. And someone who might suppose in the next room, in exasperation, says, it's not raining, you idiot, you're just standing in the shower. Okay. Now, they will have misunderstood me because when I said il peut, the condition of satisfaction of my utterance was just to pronounce the word correctly. It had no, I did not mean what I said. What's the difference between saying il peut and meaning it, and saying il peut and not meaning it? Wittgenstein, by the way, asks us questions like that a lot of the time to try to remind us that meaning is not the name of an introspective mental state and so on. All the same, there's a difference. There's a difference between my saying il peut in the shower to practice French pronunciation, and when we go outdoors, let's say in Paris, I notice the rain, and I say il peut. Then I said it and meant it. What's the difference? The difference is that in the second case, my utterance commits me to truth. It commits me to truth conditions. It commits me to its being the case that it's raining. That is to say, my utterance now has conditions of satisfaction imposed on the utterance. Okay, so in order to get from here to here, we have to have meaning, and that's a matter of imposing conditions of satisfaction on conditions of satisfaction. Now, we might imagine, it's not too much to imagine, that our hominids would evolve conventional devices for doing that. So far, we've just got one-word sentences. They can say things like rain, or danger, or fire, or food. But we might suppose they get conventional devices for doing that. And then if we suppose that if their pre-linguistic cognition enables them to discriminate objects, to recognize properties of objects as being the same on different occasions, they might also evolve noun phrases and verb phrases. They might give an inner structure to the sentence. All right, now I want to say, again, I'm going through this rapidly because my main target is social ontology, not language, but I want to show you how language can do this. Our hominids move from pre-linguistic forms of cognition with the addition of three elements: meaning, convention, and inner syntactical structure. Now they've got sentences, and they can utter these sentences meaningfully in order to perform speech acts according to the conventions of the language. Now they've made a remarkable move, because though this stuff over here already carries a kind of commitment, if I have a belief, I'm committed to truth, at least in the sense that if I discover that the belief is false, I have to give up on it. But once I get the intentional utterance according to the conventions of the language for the purpose of representing the state of affairs in the world, I have something that is curiously neglected in standard semantic accounts. Namely, I have commitment. I'm now committed to the truth in a much stronger sense than my belief ever committed me to the truth. The invention of the three devices that I mentioned, meaning, syntax, and convention, enables human beings to do a remarkable thing. They can lie. And as far as I know, no other animal
intentionally represent the state of affairs according to the conventions of the language, which they do not believe to exist, and that's got a technical name. That's called a lie. And they are in the same technical vocabulary called liars. But it's the capacity to lie which reveals that human beings involved in this very simple language that I've described already have created something which is, as far as I know, distinctive of human beings. Namely, they have created commitments. And what exactly is a commitment? When we introduce the notion of commitment, we have already introduced a notion that is one of those crucial notions that involve obligations, requirements, duties, authorizations, permissions, and a whole lots of others that just to abbreviate, I will call deontic. We introduced deontic conditions, it's from the Greek word for duty. We've introduced deontic conditions onto their utterances. With the introduction of the simple kind of speech act, the human beings, by moving from this state to this state, according to the conventions of the language, have introduced a simple deontology. And what's the point of that? These deontic conditions, duties, requirements, obligations, and commitments, they create something that, again, as far as I know, is unique to human beings and human society, namely desire-independent reasons for action. When you make a promise, you have created a reason which is independent of what you're otherwise inclined to do. A guy invites you to go to Beijing, and on the day, and you accept, on the day in question, you don't feel like going through that hassle at the airport and sitting on an airplane for 12 hours. All it's saying, you have created a desire-independent reason for doing it, and sure enough, here we are. And this, I want to say, is not an accident. It's how human society works. Okay, we're building this up one step at a time. Now, we've got these people where these hominids who can create these commitments, these duties, obligations, requirements, and so on, they can create those by intentionally creating them. Now I want to say, if we imagine this tribe with this simple language that I have described, it's inevitable that somebody's going to get the idea of laying claims in a way that tries to commit others, in addition to just committing himself or herself. He is going to say things like, this is my hut. That's my woman. He is our leader. Now notice what goes on in those cases. If you can make the claim, you can claim to possession, and you can get other people to accept the claim, you have created a public deontology. You have given the community desire-independent reasons for acting. Rousseau says somewhere that the great disaster occurred when the first person laid claim to property. I want to say it's inevitable. Once you've got a deontology and once you've got a language that enables you to create deontic commitments, you're going to be able to say things like, this is my hut, that's your beer, an example that I mentioned earlier. He is our leader, and then we're off and running. What have we done? What have we done when we said, this is my hut? Is we laid a claim to it. That is to say, we have asserted that it stands in a certain relation to me, but furthermore, we have established now an institutional fact because we have said there is now to be a socially recognized obligation, an obligation of private property that gives me certain rights to this hut that you don't have. And that is, we've got the double direction of fit. We have got a declaration where we make something the case as by representing it as being the case. Now, for a long time, I used to think, well, there's a very simple way of representing all that, and it gives you the way that human society actually works. And that is, I thought there's a general form that goes like this. We say X counts as Y. We say this counts as my property, and then you get general rules. Anybody who satisfies certain conditions counts as President of the United States in context C. And for a long time, I thought the basic move by which we create human society is this, what I call the constituted rule, X counts as Y and C. It works pretty well, but there are some interesting counter-examples. Sometimes you can create the Y status function. That's what all these are. He's my property. He's the president, and so on. What I earlier call status functions. Sometimes you can do that without having an X term. You can create an institutional fact out, so to speak, of thin air, out of the sheer blue sky. And the favorite example is the creation of corporations. Some genius invented the idea of the limited liability corporation, an object which is very powerful but has no physical existence. In the case of the corporation, there is no X object, which now counts as the General Motors Corporation. No, we just created it out of thin air. How did we do it? I want to reach at the California statutes regarding the creation of corporation. Section 208. One or more natural persons, partnerships, associations, or corporations, domestic or foreign, may form a corporation under this division by executing and filing articles of incorporation. All you have to do is perform a speech act. You execute and file. I wish I'd written this myself. It is applied speech act theory. You create the corporation simply by declaration. It gets even more wonderful. The corporate existence begins upon the filing of the articles and continues perpetually. I mean, that's the trail of the human serpent. It continues perpetually unless otherwise expressly provided by law or in the articles. In other words, you create the corporation simply by declaring it to exist. You say, when you file the articles, this creates the corporation, and it does. You make something the case by representing it as being the case. All right, but then isn't that a counter-example to the claim that I made earlier? And in fact, I published, there's nothing that makes you cheer up more than discovering counter-examples to your published claims. But if you work hard at it, I think you can see that it deepens, it gives us a deeper insight. In that case, we had a Y creation, which did not have a previously existing X term. How does it work? Let's ask ourselves, what kind of a speech act is it to count something as a Y, which wasn't already a Y? He wasn't already the President of the United States. It's not already money. It's not already my property. That has to be created by declaration. And I want to say this is the general form of a declaration. What we've done is create a reality by declaring it to exist. Now, why is that so powerful? Well, it iterates upward indefinitely. And it spreads laterally all over the lot. So I don't just have money, but I have money in my bank account, and I use it to pay my credit card bills, my state and federal income taxes. That's a case where you see the institutional fact of money spreading laterally through other institutions. But furthermore, these things mount upwards. I make these noises through my mouth. That counts as making a promise. But in that context, making a promise counts as undertaking a contract. And that sort of contract, in this situation, counts as getting married. And of course, if you get married in the state of California, and I assume in China, institutionally and logically speaking, all hell breaks loose, because now you're entitled to spousal benefits, income tax deductions, all sorts of pension rights, ways of dividing property, and so on. So what you get is the X term that becomes the Y term, but the Y term at one level becomes the X term at the next level up. So the general path that we have seen is not that covers every case. It doesn't cover, for example, electronic money, where the money has no physical existence, and it doesn't cover the creation of corporations. many people naively suppose when they put money in a bank, there must be a drawer with their name on it where their money is kept. Not so. All you get is a magnetic trace on a computer disk. And don't think the magnetic trace, that trace there, that's really my money. No, that just represents your money. What you need in order to have electronic money is a system of representation. But the system of representation in these cases makes something the case by representing it as being the case. So when the bank gives a loan, it loans money it doesn't have, and it thus creates money simply by opening an account and representing money as existing in that account. Like the creation of a corporation, it is a paradigm, a classic of the Declaration of Speech Act. So I want to say this was almost right when I said the building block of social reality were rules of this one, X counts as Y. But I now see it's a special case, the general form of the creation of social reality. The one that works for all human institutional reality is we make it the case by declaration that the Y status function exists, that the corporation exists, the university exists, so-and-so is the president, such and such has a bank loan, so-and-so owns a piece of property. We make all those the case by declaration, and then a very large class, but not all the classes, will be cases where you impose the status function on a pre-existing object. Okay, now if you understand that, you will understand something that I think that took me a long time to figure that out. It seems kind of easy when you say it, but it wasn't obvious to me at the beginning. And now I'd like to, if I have another 5 minutes, no, it's not like that. Okay? Okay, 10 minutes. All right, I've been talking too fast. I thought I had to get through an awful lot of material. Okay, let me say, why do we do this? I mean, what's the point of doing all of this? And the point of doing all of this is to create power relations. Human institutional reality, the reality of money, government, language, property, marriage, is above all enabling. It enables power relations to exist that could not exist without those institutional structures. You could try to imagine what life would be like if there were no such thing as money or private property or universities or educational institutions. And above all, try to imagine what life would be like without language, the fundamental human institution, the one on which all the others are built. I have to emphasize this because when I look back in the literature on this, a common mistake made in the foundations of sociology and the other social sciences is to say that human social, what the Durkheim calls social facts, that they are essentially constraining, that the purpose of these is to constrain us. And of course, when you're in the institution, it does seem constraining. You can't spend money you don't have. In baseball, you don't get 4 strikes. You can't be president if you don't get elected. But remember, the institution creates all kinds of facts that create powers. And what sorts of powers are there? Those powers are what tie in with what I call the deontology, the system of rights, duties, obligations, permissions, authorizations, requirements, etc. That is to say, the whole purpose of constructing institutional reality is to create a system of deontic powers. And how do those deontic powers work? Like the institutions themselves and the institutional facts within the institutions, they work by collective acceptance. Now, you don't always get universal collective acceptance. And that's why, in addition to the deontic powers, you have extra institutions that are also systems of deontic powers, the police force and the army. Somebody once mistakenly said, power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Well, actually, that's not how it works. It works by collective intentionality. It works by the collective imposition of status functions according to the Declarational Speech Act, typically using that form. And the poor guy who wields the gun is usually very low down in the system of status functions. The actual power is not wielded by the person with the gun. He is under orders from somebody who wields power and probably sits at a desk and signs documents, or nowadays types into a computer, and probably doesn't even own a gun, perhaps a ceremonial pistol or a ceremonial sword. So the purpose of doing all of this is to create power relations. Now, if you combine the two formulae that I've given you, one, and I won't write this on the board because it's not all that difficult. I think you'll be able to grasp it. I just say it. The basic structure of institutional reality consists of iterated applications of the principle. We make it the case by declaration that the Y status function exists. Now, why do we do that? Because we want to give power to individual S. So the second formula goes, we collectively accept that S has certain powers. He has the power to perform Act A. Now notice we also have a whole lot of operations on the power creation operator. So for example, obligation. I find a parking ticket on my windshield. I've got a power, but it's a negative power. We collectively accept that it's not the case that Searle has the power not to pay the parking ticket. Logicians among you will recognize what's going on here. You get Boolean operations on a basic power creation operator. And I'm saying that's the structure of institutional power, is sets of Boolean operations performed over the basic power creation operator. You combine those two, that is, we make it the case that the Y status function exists, and that because a person S stands in a certain relation to the Y status function, S has the power, S does A. So George Bush has the powers of the president because he's identical with the president. I have the power that goes with having 100 yuan in my pocket, not because I'm identical with 100 yuan, but because I possess the 100 yuan metal. So the next step in the argument is to see that the whole point of doing this is to create power relations, and the simplicity of the deontic status creation operator, the Declarational Speech Act, is matched by the simplicity of the power creation operator, and both of those can be put into the same formula, all within the scope of the collective acceptance. We collectively accept that the Y status function exists, and because this guy stands in relation to the Y status function, he's the vice president of the university, or he's the professor in charge of his class, we collectively accept that he has the power to do such and such. And so I'm making then the claim that all of human institutional reality in the end is an expression of two fundamental operations that are logically related. The creation of the status function in question, and then the application of the power creation operator to someone who stands in the appropriate relation to that status function. Okay, well, I could keep going all afternoon, but I think, what time is it? I want to save time for questions. Okay, so let me just summarize what I've been trying to say. 4 points. 1, the essential element of human reality, human social reality, by which we differ from other animals, is the existence of status functions that can only be performed by collective acceptance. Now, when I talk about us versus animals, I'm not trying to put down the other animals. You know, if the animals besides us can do this, welcome to the club. I'm just citing, unfortunately you're in the club, I'm just citing some distinctive features. Status functions, that's what's crucial. The point of creating status functions is to create power relationships, and they enable us enormously Your life is an incredible network of status functions. I get up in the morning and I have breakfast in a house that I own with my wife. I drive in a car legally because I'm a valid holder of a California driver's license. I arrive on the campus and I go to my office where I deal with students, professors, colleagues, and other university officials. I give my lecture, I go to lunch where I pay for it with a credit card, I then go back and call my insurance man to try to alter my homeowner's insurance. All of that is this incredible sea of institutional reality that we all live in. And what I'm trying to say is that is created by a single operator that is applied over and over and over. And it enables, what it does is create sets of power relations. So the first proposition was status function. The second proposition is that we do that for the purpose of creating power relations. The third proposition that I want to give you is that we do that with a single logical linguistic operator, the creation of a reality by representing that reality as existent. And I don't want to make a fetish of the symbolism. This is just a sort of shorthand for what I'm trying to convey. That you get the double direction fit because you create a new reality and thus achieve the word direction of fit, but you do that by representing that reality as already existing by the word-to-word direction of fit. And finally, the essential point that I want to leave you with, and that is language is not just one human institution among others. It is the essential human institution. Intuitively, we all feel, look, you can have a tribe that has language, but does not have government, property, money, and universities. But you couldn't have a tribe that had money, government, property, and universities that did not have a language. Now, intuitively, we feel that. I'm trying to say exactly why that is so. Thank you very much.